Welcome, everyone. We're just going to wait for some more friends to join us in the Zoom webinar. Great. So my name is Salimeh Tabrizi, and I'm one of the founding members of the Canadian Psychedelic Association. It's such an honor to be with all of you as a community. I have been with the Psychedelic Association of Canada since its inception in 2019. And one of the main reasons the PAC came together was for a unified voice of plant medicine and the plant medicine community during these pivotal times on our planet. The reason why we exist is to awaken a revolution of well-being. Our vision is people living in harmony with each other and nature. Our mission is to educate about and advocate for access to all psychedelics as a basic human right. And since 2019, the PAC has been involved with many different projects, one being the access to psilocybin at end of life in Canada through the Special Access Program. We also had a petition with over 1,400,000 people in support of plant and fungi medicine, and as well building a community of over 800 members. So you can go to the website, psychedelicassociation.net, for further information to see how you can be involved and to access more research and education in this incredible field of healing at our times. Without further ado, it's my incredible honor, pleasure to welcome two incredible beings within the psychedelic and plant medicine space in our world today. Both of them are two of the most humble, hardworking, and just dedicated individuals that I know. And they're both here with us. Natalia from Mexico and Jerónimo from Ibiza, Spain. Jerónimo is joining us. It's past midnight over there. So really grateful to both of you for giving your time and energy to us in this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you, Salimeh, and for the, the PAC having this organized community is always very encouraging.
Thank you so much. So, of course, both of you, Natalia, Jerónimo, you work for ICEERS. If you could just give us a little bit of your own personal background. Natalia, we can start with you. I always ask individuals why. Obviously, this is a tiresome, dedicated field. Please share with us why you're doing the work that you're doing and when you engage with ICEERS, and maybe a bit of background about what ICEERS does.
Yes, of course. So while I was in law school and then always found this intersection between human rights and drug policy. And there is where I started to see like these gray zones, which were kind of, a perfect momentum for also human rights violations. Then I, started to study these indigenous rights as well around their plant medicines and how they sometimes fall within the framework, within the drug control policy. And then I got in touch with ICEERS, who they were actually looking for some help within the Ayahuasca Defense Fund, which is a program of ICEERS that concentrates on supporting and providing legal support to the persons who are, facing criminal charges or administrative charges for the use or importation of these plants. So I've been, the coordinator of the Ayahuasca Defense Fund since 2017 now. And through, within the ADF, we've supported around 284 legal incidents in 44 countries, which is, this talks a lot about the trends also, which is something that we'll talk, further during this time together. But we also do a lot of proactive work, not only waiting for incidents to happen, but we also, kind of engage with the authorities, with governments, with the United Nations, and also working not only within the drug policy framework, but also with human rights and the rights of nature, of course, which is kind of another legal trend that we're looking into. So yeah, I've been, in service through the ADF and with ICEERS, and I would love to hear how Jero explains what ICEERS is, because it's a a very complex entity which has been evolving throughout the years, and there's a lot of things that we're focusing on. But as regards to the legal work, we also do a lot of policy advocacy at the United Nations level, not only within the Vienna conventions, but also within the Geneva bodies that are in charge of monitoring the implementation of human rights.
Thank you so much. And again, as listeners are tuning in, the breadth and the variety of projects that you and the team are in charge of at ICEERS is amazing, because it's both on the kind of the local level, but again, going into the higher international levels as well. Thank you, Natalia, and then Jerónimo.
Yes, thank you. My name is Jerónimo, and I'm Social Innovation Director at ICEERS. Social means groups of people, and innovation means new things, and basically social innovation means getting groups of people to do new things. I am particularly interested in the integration of ceremonial plant work outside of the countries of origin. Now, ceremonial plant work is not new at all. It has hundreds or thousands of years old, but for non-Amazonian societies, it can be quite new, just a few decades or even less in some places. And this is where the innovation part comes. I would like to imagine a future in which our societies, non-Amazonian societies, can benefit from these plants and these practices the same way, or not the same way, because it won't be the same, but in a similar manner as the original societies of origin benefit from these plants. And this means many things have to change. Not just at the legal level, which of course they have to do, and at the administrative level, and just to sort of make space for these practices, but also sort of at a cultural level. These plants and these practices that come from indigenous people present us with quite a challenging sort of paradigm shift in terms of how we understand health, how we understand our relationships to each other, how we understand medicine, how we understand. So this is the part that I'm fascinated with. The work I do is I lead a project called the Ethnobotanical Futures Incubator, and basically we try to think 15-20 years into the future. So we try to imagine if ceremonial plant work was already integrated in our societies and it could be practiced legally and safely, what would that even look like? What would we like it to be like? Who would regulate it? How would the decisions get made? What type of people would be working in which circumstances? And then we try to work backwards towards the present to see what steps need to be taken. So the work that we do is sort of multifaceted. There's part of it that looks like a think tank. There's a part of it that looks like sort of fostering process of self-organization among facilitators. So because they're going to need to, we understand that it's like a new profession for our cultures, and then new professions, they need to go the way new professions go, like coaches and other professions. They organize themselves, they create professional bodies, they self-regulate, and then slowly get sort of integrated. And there's other parts that have to do with how do we learn and take care of the sort of the accidents and the challenging experiences that people have, so we can do that from the community in a community-rooted way. And there's a part that is education, there's a part that is research, but basically we start from the perspective that the government is not going to do a better job at sort of coming up with a proposal for how this should happen than the people who are directly involved with it will. So it's important that the people that are directly involved with this think not only of the work itself, which is very busy, but also of how they want to be perceived by the outside society, and then how they want to be recognized by the outside society. That's part of the work we do.
Thank you so much for that. I really appreciate both of your perspectives, and the angle of legality is one thing currently, what's needed, and meeting the regulations of our times, but also what you said in the future kind of focus, and looking back from there, what do we want the vision to be? And as ayahuasca is spreading across the world, we know this, how is self-regulation working in different countries, and how do we ensure circle of care, ethics, proper use, reciprocity. These are all, incredible pillars that you guys are holding. I know the PAC is holding, other memberships and groups in the United States are working towards that. And how have the Indigenous done it? What can we take away from the ceremonial use? And so, right now we're kind of at a fork in the road. Natalia, you're on the front lines of one of the most important cases that I feel we've seen on the legal front, and this is Jose Campos's current trial. And so, of course, we've shared in the write-up before this webinar went out last year, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, I believe in 11 months ago, Jose Campos was arrested entering Mexico with ayahuasca. He has then been imprisoned. And finally, after 11 months, there is a trial going on, and you're right in the middle of the trial. So please share with us a little bit about, again, your role, what has taken place, and what you foresee coming in the next few weeks.
Yeah, so of course, we've been, in the coordination of the Ayahuasca Defense Fund, we've seen a lot of, legal challenges going on in different parts of the world. But this is the first time that we see a legal case in Mexico, which we never suspected, because, Mexico normally has a lot of respect for traditions and the cultural use of these plants. And, they're endemic to this country, some of them like mushrooms and peyote and so on. So there's normally kind of a comprehensive approach to these policies around Indigenous use of plants. However, we've seen kind of an escalation on how the authorities know what ayahuasca is about, but they totally ignore the legal framework and the legality of ayahuasca, not only at the international level, which of course it's not a scheduled substance under the treaties of the United Nations, which are kind of the regulation that applies at the international level to all substances. There are only 3 plants considered kind of illegal, which is cannabis, which is actually under review at the moment, the coca leaf, which is a scheduled substance, and the opium poppy. So other than those 3 plants, no other plant is considered illegal. So this is where the gray zone kind of comes in, because most countries do schedule the DMT. And of course, ayahuasca contains DMT, natural DMT, as a lot of, citrus fruits, and it's an indigenous substance and so on and so forth. So this was kind of a surprise, a country which of course has these traditions as well. And then seeing a person that identifies himself as indigenous being, put in prison for the importation of these plants. Of course, what we never took into consideration is that there's a war against drugs here, which is quite serious. So of course, the Marines, which are now in charge of customs because of the war on drugs, we never suspected this was going to be very complicated. So he was arrested in March, and there's this preventive prison for felonies, which, kind of go against public health. So he's been in prison ever since. So this is one of the most challenging incidents that we've seen in the Ayahuasca Defense Fund. But now, as you mentioned, we're just in the middle of the trial. So after, a year, finally we got to, deliver some of the proofs that we have, some evidence. So normally with the ADF, we do support local lawyers to kind of build a legal strategy on what are the arguments or what are the pieces of the puzzle we can play with to kind of have the best strategic litigation, as we call it, to kind of demonstrate that these substances are far from posing a danger to public health. And we've managed to, have some precedents, positive sentences, like in Spain or in Chile, where the judges have recognized that this is not a scheduled substance and that could actually be good for public health. So we're in this moment, we're just in the middle of the trial. So we have 2 more weeks to go. We also, I must say that all cases, we do win with scientific evidence. So I just want to, acknowledge all the scientific evidence that ICEERS has also been able to kind of make and publish. I think we're one of the institutions that most publishes papers with ayahuasca. So this, of course, helps a lot with the trial. So this is the importance of having scientific evidence for advocacy as well. It goes hand by hand. So next week we will have Jose Carlos Bozo. So he's our director of the scientific kind of area of ICEERS. He's very knowledgeable in ayahuasca, has a lot of papers published, and he will be, attending to court as an expert. So I will be doing the same work, but with a legal aspect, kind of demonstrating that ayahuasca is not a controlled substance under international law. And kind of the arguments that we use to kind of demonstrate that ayahuasca cannot be reduced to DMT. So just to summarize, it's kind of the first argument I would say is making this pharmacological and legal difference between ayahuasca and DMT. The second argument that we use is normally asking for the exact quantity or percentage of DMT, which is normally very, very low. So sometimes the authorities can, kind of know how ridiculous it is to start a process and prosecute someone for such quantity of DMT. And then, of course, we make this difference that natural DMT, considering natural DMT to be under control is an illusion, as it is present in the natural world. So what is actually under control is the synthetic or synthesized version of DMT. So all of these arguments, we do kind of support ourselves with all the evidence that we have. So at this point, with Jose Campos trial, we're just in the middle of that. So next week, we'll be able to kind of demonstrate to the prosecutor how, she's in a mistake in the sense that they tend to just reduce all the pharmacology and all the cultural aspects of ayahuasca to pure DMT, which is kind of the first mistake that we've seen in other countries as well.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much for giving us such a well-rounded explanation of what's going on. And of course, yeah, you guys have dealt with legal cases in different countries and have always been on the forefront of, responding when individuals have had issues. But in this case, you're absolutely right. It's in Mexico. It's with an indigenous medicine carrier. Again, with this situation of the Marines coming into the customs because of the changes in Mexican government that way, it's impeded and just kind of put a block in that way. So, we can look at it from the place of that this is unfortunate, and absolutely, like it's heartbreaking that, medicine, as again, we're speaking as a human right, would be prosecuted, and individuals carrying medicine would be prosecuted. So that's one side of it. And then on the other side, but as we trust that this is really bringing another layer of illumination to the arena, and like you're educating, and the team is bringing these kinds of the research evidence, as well as the differentiation, because these laws are so old, and like you said, we carry DMT within our bodies. Many plant species carry DMT, and so natural DMT cannot be prohibited. It just doesn't make sense. And the differentiation between ayahuasca and DMT is really important. So that's great that you guys will be demonstrating the research in that way. Jerónimo, I want to ask you a little bit about, we'll kind of go back and forth, we'll come to the trial, and we'll come, maybe I can ask a little bit about other situations in Europe that have also had, and maybe Natalia, you can jump in as well, like where have you seen that the success of the legal cases, and especially with the public health angle, have been in your favor for ICEERS?
I think I'll just talk about a few countries and Natalia can round up, but Spain has had the most, I think, legal cases around ayahuasca in the world, probably. It's been more than 20, close to 30. All of them, the ruling was innocent, so all of them resolved with an innocent, except one where the person declared themselves guilty. They pledged guilty in order to make up, but they probably would have been innocent. With that said, the situation is getting worse in Spain. Now there's sort of new accusations. It's recognized even in mainstream media that ayahuasca is legal. I'm sorry, it's not legal. It's not illegal, which is not the same as it's legal. It's not illegal, but that doesn't mean it's legal to offer, to share, or to advertise. And now there's been a number of raids. I think we're going now, it's the fourth one now. And the accusations are different. The accusations have to do with sort of, practicing medicine without a license or making medicinal claims by people who are not medical professionals. So sort of saying that they can cure certain illnesses or diseases or, mental health problems. And also about sort of like sectarian sort of, some of like, the idea generally is that this is being used by people in sects to manipulate other people who come to them in a vulnerable state because of their problems. Then in Italy, but it remains not illegal in Italy, where there hasn't been any cases or just very, very few cases. It is now illegal. It's happened recently, quite by surprise. It is also been illegal in the Netherlands, and it's been illegal in France for the longest. And then, perhaps Natalia can talk about some of the, other cases in Europe.
Yeah, so actually, as Jero said, once that we explained the main arguments that we use to kind of, show the authorities how ayahuasca is normally not scheduled if it only says DMT in the law. This has confirmed that, for example, France in 2005, after a legal case, decided to actually schedule ayahuasca as both plants, that where ayahuasca comes from. So since 2005, Psychotropia viridis and Manisteropsis capi is scheduled under drug laws in France. So that's kind of the main argument that, kind of proves us right, in the sense that if ayahuasca, literally, it's not stated in the law, then it's not illegal. So this was the first country to kind of schedule ayahuasca as a controlled substance. And then was followed by a ruling by the Supreme Court in the Netherlands, which of course ruled, doing kind of an exercise of ponderation between religious freedom and controlled substances, ruled that you could have freedom of religion without the use of ayahuasca. So this was very unfortunate, of course, but then it was ruled this way in the Netherlands. And then last year, as Jero mentioned, Italy followed the steps of France. And then, right now where we're standing at in Europe is within this complex scenario for ayahuasca. Then comes Spain, which was normally, pretty safe. I wouldn't say legal, of course. There's always confiscations and there's always, trials, and, you do need to stay in touch with the lawyers and so on. But then this recent months, we've seen how the authorities are kind of following this argument on the sectarian issue, and following kind of the same track that France kind of designed for making these substances legal. So at this moment, it was pretty safe to import ayahuasca in Spain, but now we're in a very, very, very delicate moment. I would say in Europe in general. So, and this, this has to do also with connecting the dots, because that's what we do in the ADF. We kind of follow the trends, and we just don't want, to have all this kind of way of understanding plant medicines to be exported into other regions. But then, of course, we see how, Mexico has started with this legal incidents, and, pretty much in the Americas, we've had a lot of incidents. For example, in the United States, where we could see how the authorities would not have a stance on the legality of ayahuasca. They wouldn't go that far. However, we did see how all incidents will end up in plea bargain, or sometimes a fee, or sometimes a don't do this again. It's rather than, a much more intimidation strategy from the authorities, rather than just, banning something or making it illegal. However, we've seen a lot of incidents in the US as well, but they would never end up in a sentence. So I mean, until today. But then, whatever we do in the ADF is we also monitor this kind of waves of prohibitionism that, go from one region to another. So right now in the ADF, there's a lot of proactive work that needs to be done, not only at the European level, of course, but also we don't want that kind of prohibitionist approach to travel to other jurisdictions. So it's part of our work also to kind of stop these trends as well.
Exactly. As part of trying to create an alternative, it's kind of hard to, as a different trend is coming forward, for you to try to bring the conversation somewhere else. That's what we're constantly trying to do, bring the conversation into light. And I think it was, a shock to a lot of us when last year Italy went unscheduled. And, it's unfortunate to hear that Spain, it's becoming harder and harder in Spain as well. And then with what happened with, of course, with France and Holland. So the trends and what you guys are, looking at, again, coming back to the Mexico piece, and I appreciate, Jerónimo, how you highlighted what's happening in Europe. And again, I think the reason why we wanted to put this webinar on is many people actually don't know what's going on in different regions of the world. And, we're all connected through this ultimately this vine, and we want to protect and support. And so this is I feel a really important conversation, and I know many people in the community as well. And so making sure that the trends, like you were saying, Natalia, don't really kind of move into other areas. Mexico is pivotal in Central and South America. So, we were all at Aya Summit in Costa Rica less than a month ago, and, the conversations were a lot around this, like, how do we prepare? How do we prevent? And so I guess my first question for you is, ideally, what would be the best case scenario out of Jose Campos's trial and the trial of the other individuals who have been detained after him? And what could you then see come from that for other countries in Central South America?
Yeah, so right now we're working very hard on kind of two lines. So normally whenever there's a legal incident, we like to see this as an opportunity to work, because sometimes it's kind of the perfect trigger to kind of demonstrating that this is actually good for public health and it shouldn't be illegal for that reason. And also to kind of foster that any public decision should be evidence-based, which is something that not only for drug policy, but in general, policies should be based on evidence. And this is something that is not very constant in countries. So this is something we want to actually foster as well. So right now, I think the best outcome would be, of course, if the judge could acknowledge that ayahuasca is not a controlled substance. But then, of course, we need to work on the self-regulation piece that you just mentioned. And this is something that, Jero does, and it's a very valuable work also for the ADF, because it's envisioning that these plant medicines were totally legal or out of the gray zone. This scenario is also quite scary, right? As we really need to make sure that we do have the preparation, we do have reciprocity with communities and with nature. We want to make sure that it is safe to use this plant medicines and so on, right? So this is part of the responsibility of the community to kind of really, go a little bit forward and just pose the question, what can we actually do to have, self-regulation? So I guess what happened in Costa Rica, almost a month ago was pretty interesting in the sense that there was, this unification of the community was not triggered by a legal incident, which is, really unique. And I would really encourage other countries to do the same thing, kind of the communities to take responsibility and act proactively. So sometimes the question is, what can we do to prevent a legal incident? And the answer for sure is, getting together and actually having legal harm reduction work being done and looking into self-regulation before anything happens. So I guess this is something that I really value for the work that Jero has been doing through years now, that actually, getting together the community and kind of having this conversation, because also each country is very unique on the regulation and the opportunities that, each country has, and all the arguments that we can play with. But it is really important to have the community, first of all, together, kind of aligning the community on what are the best practices. If there's something happens, who's the lawyer in charge? Who's kind of the speaker? How can we foster scientific evidence? How can we foster, the best practices, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, exactly. And Jerónimo, I'd love to hear more about your advocacy work, because I know you're constantly going to different communities, to different countries, having the, conversations and the training. And exactly, I feel that, the Psychedelic Association of Canada, the birthing of it was exactly this, that we need to be one voice, especially in a legitimized arena, so that the government really comes to one group, or at least an umbrella of groups working together. Because when the governments see that people are actually self-regulating, and I remember from the decrim movement, one of the individuals there said communities know how to heal themselves. And so when there is authority and there is ethics and regulations, when there's not a council, a body that's already doing that, but people mobilize and are responsible, then the government can kind of take notice. So how has that been for you, Jerónimo, especially with the pressures that now are that are being brought in with the scheduling? How are people mobilizing in different countries in Europe and in other non-origin countries?
Yeah, it's basically up until very recently, people that work with plants is called, ayahuasca facilitators. They live very, very atomized sort of existences, in the sense that you had many different groups that were working with this. They existed in a sort of a bubble. The group was, the person who served, and the people, and the person who drank with this person, and the assistants. Sometimes there were some sort of like associated groups, but generally speaking, people sort of knew that other groups existed, but there was very little interaction between them. There was even a lot of mistrust in some cases between the different facilitators. So there's two sort of negative consequences come out of that. One is that sort of better practices don't circulate. This is like, I don't know, if you look at, I don't know, surfers as 50 years ago, and you look at surfers now, you can see an incredible evolution of how good they have gotten and the things they can do. And this is because they are constantly talking to each other and learning from each other, and then this entire collective. But because ayahuasca facilitators, but not just ayahuasca facilitators, it happens in general when you're dealing with anything clandestine, people tend to sort of work in silos. Then these sort of best practices, this knowledge doesn't circulate. And then the other thing that happens also, because this knowledge doesn't circulate, is that you often end up with sort of this sort of, sometimes, sort of less knowledgeable actors, either out of ignorance or out of malice, both. They begin to actually not just have not the best practices, but actually having quite poor practices. And what this does is sort of this calls the negative attention of the authority. So you get like, from everything from people doing, really sort of aggressive advertising in a mistaken belief that this is because it's not scheduled, that it is legal, all the way from all sorts of different things. And this of course makes things difficult to everybody. Now, as when groups are atomized, also they know about these other people that are doing, bad actors. But as an individual group, who are you to go to another group to tell, hey, you should change the way you can we talk about the way you do your advertising? But any sort of self-regulation you need a group to do this, right? You need a sort of an organized group, and then in this organized group with a sort of agreed upon sort of ethical code and best practices, then you can reach out to other individuals that are outside of the group and say, hey, listen, this is how we've organized ourselves. We can do this, but so we've been sort of fostering these processes now for many years in a number of countries, and it happens basically. It moves at the speed of trust. It cannot move at any other speed. You're basically building a community, and a community is built on trust. And trust, for people to trust each other, it takes the time it takes. It's not something that can come from above. You cannot sort of in any way sort of cajole or convince people to trust one another. This is something that happens through interaction. So and in many ways, there wasn't also sort of an awareness in many people working with plants that this is sort of that it depends on them. They're sort of waiting for the government to do something that will clarify their situation, but this is not. It doesn't happen that way. It's never happened that way for groups that have been in the periphery of society. They have to organize, they have to push, they have to lobby, and then eventually they get acknowledged and they get integrated in our society. So what we do is we try to foster these processes, which is very different from saying that we're leading these processes. We don't have the ambition nor the capacity to lead processes like this, but we can give a lot of support as different groups in different countries begin to organize and advise and help them with many different details, because the work is sort of the same, and then it takes part in different places, but the work that is necessary is the same. It's, the groups have to get together, people have to start to talk, they begin to talk about safety, they begin to talk about better practices, they begin to talk about legal harm reduction, and they begin to share knowledge, and they begin to spend time with one another, and they begin to recognize each other, and they begin to recognize themselves as a community. And then from there, things evolve according to the different, so in some places it's going quite fast, in some places it's going slower. It depends a lot on the circumstances of each individual country. In any case, we see this as what it is. It's a long-term process. It doesn't happen from one day to the next. It goes at the speed of trust. And we sort of, take inspiration from the history of ayahuasca, which is very, very long. It's been around for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And it's always been the same. Ayahuasca has always been expanded. Ayahuasca is not a plant, it's a formula, it's a preparation of two plants. So somebody or a group of people somewhere where there was a first time that these two plants were put together, and a first person and a first place, maybe it was several, but out of these it went to the next community and 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 to the next community, all the way to us having this conversation today about this. Right, we are all directly connected to some event that happened in the Amazon jungle hundreds, if not thousands of years ago. And every year, this gets bigger. So we also see it as sort of, or, I see it as a process that is inevitable. It is the nature of these to spread. And it spreads from person to person, and it spreads from person to person because people find it useful. When you and when you look at the people who have been having the longest relationship with this, with ayahuasca, for example, you can see how valued and precious it is for those cultures. For sure, there was a day when this was also very new, and it wasn't, and maybe it wasn't so, and there was, it took certain amount of, and now we're in that state. Now it's new for us, and and we're the ones that are confused. But the process itself has been going on for a very long time, and it will continue. So we try to think long term. We try to look at the history of these and take inspiration from that, and we understand that it's it's moving in a way, it's moving very fast, but it's not something that will happen from one day to the next. That's why, again, at the Futures Incubator, we think like 10, 15 years, 10, 20 years into the future, and try to work with those timeframes to really get close to the sort of the speed of the actual phenomenon.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And again, ayahuasca moving into more of the individualistic countries, it really, I would say, it's really bringing that sense of cohesion between humans, and that we somehow have to harmonize and work together and collaborate and trust each other. And this takes time. And really, ultimately, I feel like the medicine is weaving us to come together for whatever is to come. But really, my sense is our survival really depends on this, because nature is in harmony and humans are somehow out of harmony right now. And so how do we come into this more collaborative part? So I hear you in groups coming together, and what a gift it is that you and the team go and in some way seed and activate and foster. I love the word that you used as foster, because every group has its own energy and its own sense of what's right for them. But there can be principles, there can be values, there can be sharing of these kinds of things for the betterment. A part of me, of course, agrees with you that it's perfect. And we've just, look at what has been accomplished in the last 10 years, just with, ayahuasca going globally. And at the same time, there have been some setbacks in Europe. And so you're in conversation, you're in interaction with a lot of individuals in those countries. And so how, let's go into the human side of things a bit. How are they keeping the momentum, their sense of safety? Because we know for trauma-informed care, safety is the foundation for any healing work. And so, are they going to different, and maybe these are questions you can't answer, and if you don't want to, no problem, but are they going to different countries? How are they creating more silos for this kind of work, even with the new regulations?
I think right now, people working with ayahuasca, they don't like to think about it this way, but they're actually all sort of like, it's like when everybody's in the same swimming pool, and then somebody jumps and everybody goes up and down, this is the situation that they're in, whether they like to or not. They are affected by the actions of other people in the group, also working with ayahuasca, and sometimes their actions are not the wisest ones. Now, this is not the case for other, so I don't know, if somebody not very intelligent gets on a Lamborghini and then proceeds to have an accident, nobody is going to say, what are we going to do about Lamborghinis, right? I mean, the question is, why was this not very good driver driving this car at most, right? But this is not the case with ayahuasca. If someone not too smart, does something really foolish with ayahuasca and it becomes very public, this will affect everybody else that's working with it on that country. And nobody's going to say like, oh, what are we going to do with this? They're going to say, what's the problem with ayahuasca? This will remain like this for some time, once this gets normalized or legitimized, like cars and like everything, people will make the difference between the technology and the operator, is to call it something. But until then, this is the case, right? So this is sort of, so a lot of the concerns that I hear have to do precisely with these, with people who are having, some more questionable practices, people who are doing very, very loud and obvious paid advertising. There's a huge, very interesting debate now going on about, is it okay to advertise this? Let's imagine that fully illegal. Let's imagine that there's no legal questions around. Let's imagine that this is integrated into society. Would you be able to advertise this openly? By this I mean, would you be able to call people that would not normally be attracted to this? It's one thing to talk to receive people who come and want to do this, but we're talking about something that potentially will transform your life, right? Is this type of stuff that can be advertised using the same marketing tools that we use to sell, like shoes and perfumes, or has to be in a sort of another category of products that you cannot advertise like this, like alcohol, tobacco, like complex financial products, right? Like we have different rules about what type of aggressiveness can you use in your marketing techniques, depending how serious it is what you're selling in a certain way, or what the impact on the person's life can be. But right now, because we are, again, it's all sort of, and everybody's in the same pool, you find some people that are using quite aggressive advertising techniques to actually market something that is, a very powerful experience that could, potentially transform your life. Is this the right thing? Can you go out and reach? Or if we imagine 20 years into the future, would it happen like this? Or would we find that 20 years into the future, when this is legal, actually, sort of open advertising is in a way curtailed and controlled, right? So these are the type of questions that are in the air. Is multifaceted. What we have noticed for sure is that when the advertising becomes very loud or very aggressive, and it's on social media and it's everywhere, then of course the authorities will notice, and someone will wonder if this is out of control and if something should be done about it.
I got it. Yeah, exactly. It's really that fine line between what's appropriate for the time for the container that individuals are in, and how is it going to impact other individuals. With that, Natalia, how about, we talked about this a little bit when we connected here in Costa Rica with you guys visiting. The understanding between the churches and the legal space for the Church of Ayahuasca, the Daime, UDV in Europe versus, Canada and the US. And of course, we talked a little bit about, freedom of use and sacrament in the United States and Canada being different than in Europe. How are the churches being affected under the scheduling that's happened in Italy, France, and Holland?
Well, first of all, I would say that the freedom of religion argument has not been very much kind of recognized as in the US or in Canada, for example. So I think this has to do with what we call kind of the legal anthropology of each country. So some countries, feel much more familiar with religious freedom and, how it's applied in the US and in Canada, for example. But in Europe, it was never something that could be legally acknowledged by the countries, like accepted in the same way that was accepted in the US. For example, after this litigation with the Supreme Court, wherever the Santo Daime and the UDV could be able to have this exemption for the importation and use of ayahuasca as a sacrament. In the European context, we never saw like these churches being acknowledged as such. But, just having the Supreme Court ruling, for example, in the Netherlands, and kind of just ruling that you can have the access to the freedom of religion without your sacrament, it's kind of a very narrow interpretation of what we understand for religion. What is really interesting is that right, that is contemplated in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the European Covenant of Human Rights as well. It's freedom of religion and consciousness. So this is something that we're really also looking into. What do we understand, as consciousness, and the freedom to have a consciousness is something that we also, are kind of starting to develop, and what this right really means. And so, for example, in the US, I think it's been a struggle as well, because, these two churches had the exemption under the DEA, the Controlled Substances Act, to have ayahuasca and have, freely import the ayahuasca and use it as a sacrament. But then, of course, there were a lot of churches that also were looking for that recognition, filing this kind of petitions to the DEA so they could be recognized and acknowledged as a church. But then the DEA is no longer answering to these petitions, for example. So it also feels very kind of unfair, in the sense that this right is acknowledged in the Constitution, for example, but then there are no exemptions giving any longer. So this is kind of something that is really unfair for the churches who have, kind of those that were able to reach the Supreme Court, or are the ones who have the exemption. But kind of new churches that have emerged of the Santo Daime or of the UDV, but are kind of chapters in different states in the United States or in Canada, are no longer being recognized. So it's kind of also, it feels like it's the behavior of the authorities. They want to maintain things in the gray zone as well, until they really have a stand on what are they going to do in regards to ayahuasca. So I would say it's kind of, the freedom of religion argument is very complex, because it doesn't work in each country. So it works kind of in North America, but I'm very skeptic if this work, for example, in South America. I'm sure that other rights apply, like cultural rights or indigenous rights or right to health. There's like kind of this freedom of personality that, for example, the Supreme Courts have used for cannabis, for example. But the freedom of religion is something that in other countries does not work that, that easy as in the US or in Canada. And we have the same context in Europe, for example. So of course, this resolution of the Supreme Court was very unfortunate, but it really obliged us to understand and to go further on what we understand for religion. Because my theory is that there's always kind of this very narrow and colonial approach to religion, which needs to be broader. And if not religion, then the consciousness aspect of that right is something that really needs to be explored.
Yeah, beautiful. Exactly. Another example of how just how the US culturally got birth, how religion and the freedom of religion was so important for them in that sense of independence. But in Europe, it's still more traditional and conventional in that way. So if there is a block to that, and they're not able to have the churches have the legal status as they do in the States and Canada, then what's above that? And so I'm going to open this up to you both, and maybe the greater ICEER's intention of bringing this to the UN. What have some of the openings been in regards to bringing rights of nature, rights of consciousness, as you said, and having these kind of bigger conversations, especially at the wake of awakening that we're in right now? What's going on in that realm?
Well, as for the freedom of religion, it hasn't been much explored. There's a lot of jurisprudence, for example, in the European Courts of Human Rights, but none of those include plant medicines. And actually, the Santo Daime Church in the Netherlands tried to file a petition in the European Courts of Human Rights after this ruling under the Supreme Court, but of course this was not accepted. Some of the criteria for having access to a petition for the European Court of Human Rights is really kind of narrow and strict, because they have, a lot of demands on petitions. And this was kind of not accepted as a formal petition. So it's also kind of hard to know where should one go whenever this has been denied. And if it's not these regional courts, then it's really complicated to have, another kind of way for challenging these decisions. So it's been really hard in regards to freedom of religion. And as for the freedom of consciousness, there's no really content until today of what does that mean, or what the international legislator meant by consciousness is something that still remains kind of a mystery. And there's, it's in the covenant and most international treaties for a reason. but it still has no content. So this is something that we're also exploring. And as for the rights of nature, is something that actually South America has been a pioneer on the rights of nature. A lot of them fostered, of course, by Bolivia and by Ecuador, who are one of the most two countries that have, raised up to the constitutional level the protection of Pachamama as a right. So, for example, in Ecuador, Pachamama is kind of in the constitution as something that needs to be protected and has rights, something that they call kind of the rights to have rights. So it's thanks to these precedents that also other countries have, been exploring what do they mean by the rights of nature. And it's also Colombia who has been, given big steps on protecting the river, the Rio Altrato, which is part of the Amazonian part of Colombia, as, an entity that has rights. So just looking into what would happen if we could protect the Amazon as, an entity that has rights, human rights, the right of the right for dignity, for example, to be protected. And it's not only the human being has the right to, a safe environment, but also going further and say, what does a river need to exist? Because it has rights as a river. So it's what we call also the biocultural rights, which is something very interesting, because maybe in the future, plants could actually be protected as biocultural rights of also indigenous persons who have been protecting these plants. However, the rights of nature still seems kind of, far from being applied. Also, Spain had this really interesting ruling in Murcia, where they declared also a river as, as an entity that has the rights to have rights. But this is also still very kind of, it's still kind of an ongoing debate. Of course, some persons still kind of are in resistance of giving rights to non-human beings. But this is still something that needs to be explored. And for example, the coca leaf is also kind of somehow protected under this umbrella as something that comes from Pachamama, which is kind of the cultural heritage of a country. So you can see this in Bolivia, and you can see this in Peru as well with ayahuasca, for example. It could be the future for human rights, the rights of nature.
Absolutely. It feels so foundational, like it is because I feel that during these times we're so human-centered, and it makes a lot of sense. There's a lot of, trauma coming up to the surface for individuals. We are in this evolutionary direction of, I feel, awakening, and many of us who are working with plant medicines can attest to that. And, what is the foundation of that is that it's not all about the humans. We have to really look at the broader world and our connection to it, and hence the rights of those rivers. And I'm so happy to hear that. Thank you for bringing up Ecuador and Bolivia as, setting precedent. And hopefully that will go into the consciousness of other leaders, as in Spain and Colombia, to adhere to that. Jerónimo, looking forward, and I want to come back to Jose Campos and what's happening again with him in the prison, but going forward along with, what you and the teams envision, what would that ideal world look like in, let's say, 10 to 15 years, if we really did do this in an integrous way?
Sorry, I was muted. Right now we are in what's being called the psychedelic renaissance. The psychedelic renaissance is basically the medicalization of psychedelics, right? It's an attempt to get psychedelics sort of recognized by medical authorities, so they can be turned into prescription medicines that can be, prescribed by doctors and hopefully covered by insurance. So they will fit in the model of what our medicine looks like. Historically speaking, going back, hundreds of years after the Renaissance, the historical Renaissance, what came was the Enlightenment. So I sometimes we play with the idea of, what would the psychedelic Enlightenment look like? And what it looked like, it's sort of it's the flip side of the Renaissance. You know, the Renaissance is pharmacological, and the Enlightenment would be plant-based, and the Renaissance is individual treatment for people who have a medical diagnosis, and the Renaissance would be non-medical uses for people that don't have a medical diagnosis, because after all, most people using psychedelics don't have a medical diagnosis and maybe never will. Most people using psychedelics use them for existential, spiritual, you know, reasons, finding meaning, and just sort of, they're not people that would, you know, whatever it is that they're working through is not necessarily something that was for doctors, but for a much wider sort of existential area of life, something that is relational. It's more community based, you know. Now right now it's, you know, the Renaissance is very individualistic, sort of individual treatments of individual people with individual problems, as opposed to you know, collective problems, and even the therapy sessions will be individual, or they're sort of proposed as individual. But basically the Renaissance, as it's being presented, it's a matter of what do we need to do to psychedelics in order to fit them. So how do we adapt psychedelics to fit in the peg that we have, which is our medical system? I think what would be really interesting for the psychedelic enlightenment was to think, how does our culture need to change? Not how we change psychedelics so they fit into our medical culture, but how does our wider culture need to change in order to be able to integrate, you know, the psychedelics. And then from that, you know, the only thing you can do is take inspiration from the people that have been using this the longest. And there's a very big difference between taking inspiration from something and copying it or appropriating it. Which is when you take something that is not yours. And I could speak about this for a long time, but I won't go into them. So in general, what we would like to imagine, again, it's a future in which, you know, our societies, non-Amazonian societies, derive a similar degree of you know, respect and benefit from their relationship to these plants as you know, traditional cultures in the Amazon get, which is, you know, that these plants are highly respected. They're sort of integral in these societies. They're very, very important, and they derive, you know, there's an enormous amount of benefit that comes from this relationship. This is not the case with our relationship with other plants that also came from Amerindian societies, you know, for example, tobacco or coca. You know, there's a very stark contrast between what coca does in our societies and what coca does in the societies of origin, right? So you can, and it's the same plant, or it's the same substances, and you can say the same for tobacco, you can say the same for, you know, for San Pedro, for peyote, you know, for mushrooms. You know, the way we give, the way we use psychedelic mushrooms has, you know, nothing to do with the way. So how can we learn, and how is this process go by which we find ways to respectfully integrate these things that are informed by the wisdom that comes from the original traditions, but are not an appropriation or a copy, you know, or a very bad copy, actually, of what's actually going on in indigenous societies. This is sort of the core element, but you know, one key aspect of this, and I'll just finish with this, is that we tend to think of substances or plants or products instead of thinking of customs and spaces, and this is where we begin to go wrong, because coca for indigenous people is not certainly not a product, but definitely not just a plant. It's actually a set of customs. It's something that through which people interact. There's space associated with this interaction and all of, right? So, you know, it's when cannabis activists in the Netherlands in the 70s begin to sort of engage with the government, they didn't engage on the sort of the whether, you know, the sale of cannabis was going to be allowed or how. They engaged on a space which was called the coffee shop, which was a place where people could not only buy cannabis but also consume it. They could spend time there. People could be checked for ages. You know, people could be overseen by the staff in case they had too much, you know, and where people could sort of like, and it was part of a neighborhood, and it was part of, so sometimes, you know, I get a little bit sad when I see, you know, the sort of cannabis dispensaries, not that, you know, they're not a great advance, they are a great advance, but they look like stores with racks, right? Where there's a product that you pick. They don't look like a space, right? It's a difference between the coffee and the coffee house. You know, the coffee house is a gathering place. Coffee is just, and it's how we begin to think about this, and how do we, and how do we begin to, and this is what I mean, that what one can see this when we look at indigenous traditions without having to actually, you know, copy or ape what's going on there. One understands that it's actually a much wider, you know, biocultural system, like Natalia said, and you know, and how can we be inspired by this to do something much richer than what is right now being presented.
Beautiful. Yeah, what a beautiful way to give a model of, you know, the potential. And I appreciate what you're saying around customs and spaces rather than the medicines being products, because a lot of times that this is the whole issue with commodity and what has happened. So it's devastating what's happened with cannabis. And you brought up, you know, cannabis on the way in Canada, you know, individuals know we've legalized, but it's turned into even a more constricted way of going into stores that look like maybe what you're saying in regards to the Renaissance is like medicalized, and everything is packed up in tons of plastic, and you can't even sit and enjoy you know, time and connection with another human being around relational aspects of what's going on for you, which is ultimately at the core, everything is consciousness. And so, you know, I feel that we've taken some steps back, unfortunately, in that regard, at least in Canada. But, you know, Holland did it in a different way. Spain did it in a different way and continues to do it. But I love that it's actually about customs and spaces, because once the medicine, let's say, I always think, let's say we don't have access. Let's say for some reason we're living in a country where there's no access to ayahuasca. Those spaces and customs are still there. So people can actually come, at least this is my belief, and you know, everyone can have their own subjective experience, but we can come and sit together and still access those points of what medicine has brought in for us, if the space and the customs and the values and principles are activated within each one of us. And so I so appreciate what you shared in that. And I hope that we do come into an enlightened space as humans to be able to be with the natural environment, rather than trying to put these incredible energies and master plans into a medical system that's obviously failing us. And so, you know, I hope to more of that opening up, and as our consciousness shifts. And for now, it's wonderful. And I don't want to take away from, you know, the incredible work that's happening with, you know, so many different organizations in bringing psychedelics to the, you know, mainstream in the way that's supported right now, you know, so, and we can go beyond and we can do more. I want to bring it back, Natalia. We've kind of gone, you know, back to both of your expertise. I hope this has been, you know, I hope that's been fruitful for individuals who are watching this, but I want to bring it back to Jose Campos and his own plight in the prison system, and especially being detained after so long. So tell me a little bit about the human side of what he's going through. He released, well, you know, I believe your team and him, you released a transmission from him from inside the prison, and his voice was in prayer and in light. But I also want to share with individuals how it's actually been for him over the last 11 months.
Well, of course, at the beginning, it was really hard for him, just, imagine that, this is something he's been doing for a long time, and all of a sudden you're just, kind of being prosecuted for the importation of narcotic drugs. It's quite kind of shocking, and not only that, but only, the protracted way of the preventive prison. So I think that at the beginning he was like really, willing to just start this fight, and he's offering for the clarification of the legal status of the medicine, standing with his head high on for his medicine. But then, of course, whenever he saw that it was months, the hearings were not very fruitful, in the sense that, for the authorities, if you committed a felony that's related to drugs, it's really hard to have freedom before the trial. So this really kind of was hard for him and his family, of course, and just remembering that he has a center in Peru. So whenever he's not there, all the families that are kind of dependent on him were not being able to work. And that was like a huge impact on his community as well. So just, I just want to share that whenever a person is arrested, it's not only the individual part of, that gets kind of shocked or traumatized, but it's also the community that he or she kind of stands and kind of sustains, So it was really hard, but now, you can see the resilience of a person also as well. And how brave, throughout the ADF, I've known all of the defendants that we've, have the privilege to support. And some of them are really teachers on how they stand for the medicine and how they understand this as a process of their own spiritual growth, and offering they do for the medicine as well. And, some of them just take this legal case till the end, no matter what the consequence is. So this is something that we really treasure in the ADF, because it's thanks to these persons that we actually get to set a good precedent. But I do understand as well how hard it is. Some of our defendants really never get to share the medicine again. They get really traumatized on, kind of something that they do, or something they were in service of, and now they're in prison, or now they've been sentenced, or now they need to, face really, really delicate charges. For example, a person that we've defended, and he's in Shanghai, and he's, sentenced for life. So this is something really, really hard, not only as a community, but as, family and a community. Just knowing that someone at this moment is in prison for the use of ayahuasca is really, was really heartbreaking, But Jose has been really resilient, and he's even, kind of singing Icaros in prison, and he's right now very strong. As I said, we're in the middle of his trial and his process now. So if everything goes well, I think by the first days of March, we could have him back in Peru. So it's something also that the teachers that the ADF brings as well. We do learn a lot, of the resilience that these persons have, and how firm they can stand for the medicine that they carry.
Beautiful, beautiful. Yeah. I remember you sharing with me that at the beginning, it was a very different prison that he was in. It was more like a collective space that they had to kind of go and fend for themselves and find a bed. And over the time, he's been moved to a place where he has his own cell and has been given his guitar. And there's another Indigenous medicine carrier who's there, and they're singing the Icaros, like you're saying. And exactly, I feel like at this time, no matter what our karma, really, no matter what we're holding for ourselves and for our communities, it's really like for Mesa, just the strength of being connected to God-centeredness. And he's an incredible example of that. And so, our prayers go out to him and the other individuals who are also detained. And so when you say that he could be released as early as March and back to his community where he can continue to work is amazing. And I know that both you guys and the team have brought together a crowdfunding, and you raised, and that was incredible to see the community coming together, and you raised over 100,000 for the legal funds. Is there another, for example, if individuals are watching this and want to support not only the case and the trials, but also with future work with Ayahuasca Defense Fund, where can they support? Is there another layer of it happening?
Yes, well, it was Jose's kind of lawyers, because of course we do not represent them in trial, as we cannot do that due to we attend things globally. He has his own kind of legal team, and we support that legal team with evidence and strategies and so on. It was his legal team who kind of raised the funds that were needed, not only for the lawyers and evidence and so on, but also to kind of support his community, which was totally stopped after also recovering from the from COVID. That everything was shut down in Peru, and they were recovering from that, and then he gets arrested, and then again a shutdown came, which was really hard for his family and community. And of course, with the ADF, I mean, we work only with donations. So in our CU's webpage, there's a button for donation, and it's very much appreciated, because we use this to maybe, for example, bring our pharmacologist as expert in court trial in different parts of the world. We do all the expert reports as well. Sometimes we need to do different tests on the substance to kind of bring that argument to the prosecutor, and that is always very, very, very expensive. So of course, all donations in the ADF are really appreciated, because also a good president can help a whole community globally, and a negative president could also affect the whole community. So this is something that we really treasure and appreciate from those who have supported our work.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, absolutely. So for anyone who's hearing this and feeling the call, go and donate on the ICEER's website. It's incredible how much you guys can do with the support of the community. And this is it's an organic movement. I also just want to ask about, coming back to what Jerónimo said around customs and spaces. You and the team, also Natalia, as part of the education and advocacy in Mexico, organized a 2-day event at the Mexican Senate right at the start of Jose Campos's trial. Tell us a little bit about that and what your intentions were and what the outcome was.
Yes, well, so it was a 2-day event in the Senate, which was kind of elevating our voices also, and kind of putting our faces and really having a intercultural discussion on plant medicines. So it was really fascinating to see. There were psychiatrists from Mexico, from the government. There were senators, there were indigenous from the Noquecoy tribe in Brazil, that another member of the Noquecoy tribe is arrested. There were a lot of the Mazatec people who use psilocybin mushrooms. And we kind of had this 2-day event where we really had a serious conversation on what are the next steps for not only regulation, but the protection of biocultures and the traditional knowledge, of course. So it was really fascinating. So the outcome was that, it was really nice to see how the kind of the narrative was very easily kind of processed within the Mexican society, because it's kind of, we know that traditional medicine is somehow embodied. It's really common here to see, just traditional medicine and herbs being part of how we treat illness and so on and so forth. So whenever there were persons seeing, there are 4 persons indigenous arrested, it was quite of, a huge moment for compassion as well, for what the judicial system is really doing, and kind of questioning the war on drugs. So what we thought was only going to be a kind of small response as a community, because we responded with education, it also turned out into, a huge kind of posing the question in the Mexican Senate of how non-sustainable this war is already. So the next day, when Jose's trial started, we could see how the judge was really, friendly and kind of reading his rights as an indigenous person, and something we've never seen in the history of the IDF. We've never seen a judge that has behaved, so sensitive to the plant medicines and to indigenous kind of colonization. So we think it was all kind of perfectly planned, and it was all kind of, first of all, responding, as a community, like we've been hurt with 8 persons being arrested, 4 of them indigenous. So it was our own way of kind of responding in alliance with the senators, who were also kind of moved by knowing that the war on drugs was so crazy that was now putting in prison indigenous persons. How ridiculous this movement now is. So it's just, kind of encouraging that the advocacy needs to be kind of done more locally rather than globally, but also encouraging other communities to kind of build these alliances with governmental officials, with senators, with Congress persons, around the globe. So it was really an inspiring moment for our community, for the region, of course, and for the ADF.
Yeah, we were all watching you and cheering you on because it was live streamed, and I'm sure that it's available. We'll link it into our YouTube replay of this webinar. But I feel like you guys did such an amazing job right on the grounds, as you said, in bridging those different silos that Jerónimo was mentioning at the beginning that tend to be separated. And so bridging policymakers with the judge, with the judicial, and with the therapists and the indigenous, and saying, like we're kind of in this together. And for the judge to read the indigenous rights like that and be sensitive and show up, I think it's all a testament to how you guys curated a ceremony. Nothing short of an actual ceremony, but with many different stakeholders invited in. So again, how beautiful that you guys are responding with these new innovative ways of being, and we can definitely take note. So I feel like the next time, something like this happens, then there can be more of a container that continues to invite different stakeholders. And I know, in Canada, we're doing the same. We have an opportunity to really connect in with all of our MPs as human beings, not just some, separate being that's in the government, but as a human being, and saying like, who in your family has been affected by mental health challenges? Who in your family has had, a loved one who has, had severe challenges at the end of life? So, connecting to people's hearts. And I feel like, that's ultimately where we can go. Just choose love and move in love. Jerónimo, I want to give it back to you for final words, thoughts, shares, anything else that you'd like the audience to know.
Yeah, I would just sort of restate what I said. I don't think I could do the work I do if I didn't think this is inevitable. That the sort of the genie's out of the bottle, and the sort of the expansion of these plants and these sort of associated substances into our culture, it's literally a matter of time. And when we look at what happened in other societies, we can only hope that they help us as much as they help them. It really depends on us. We also have a previous history of quite poor relationship to other similarly powerful and sacred plants that also arrive to our shores. So it's really on us, you know, whether this turns into a curse or a blessing. Is not in the plants themselves. But I have a good hope. There's a big difference, and a sort of like a historical exception with ayahuasca, because all the other plants that have arrived, tobacco, coca, mushrooms, peyote, they came to us without none of their sort of context of use, the traditional context of use. So the way we use tobacco doesn't really resemble in any way the indigenous, and the way we use coca, both as cocaine and Coca-Cola, doesn't resemble at all traditional uses. But when you look at the sort of an ayahuasca ceremony outside of the Amazon, it looks like the ayahuasca ceremonies that take place in the Amazon. There's differences, but it's still the sort of the skeleton is the same. There's a person that serves, there's a group that gathers to drink, and there's the person that has more experience that serves to everybody and is responsible for taking care and also create some sort of environment. And this doesn't seem, we don't notice because, you know, we think that's what an ayahuasca ceremony is, but it's a sort of historical exception that this is happening, that people outside of the Amazon are actually doing ayahuasca ceremonies that resemble the ayahuasca ceremonies in the Amazon. So there's also been a great sort of historical exception here, and that gives me hope that there's hope for this, hope for us.
Aho. Yes, one of my dear friends said to me, no matter what happens and what the trajectory of human evolution and all the challenges that we might be facing in the next years, is to really keep the hope and the joy alive, and to know that we are loved and we're supported, and that, but it is a choice. Like you're saying, you know, it is up to us. So Natalia, final words from you, my dear. You know, you're tirelessly working away, and I know how much energy it takes to be in Mexico City and to show up for these trials, and to, you know, just remember everything, your expertise and your knowledge. So yeah, any final words from you?
Thank you. Yes, well, you know, sometimes whenever I just feel like I'm gonna quit because everything is sometimes very complicated, I just trust plants so much. And so whenever the arrest came here, for example, then the possibility for regulation on psilocybin mushrooms came. So it's kind of, they're working together. We don't know exactly, you know, for what or what are they really planning. But it's just trusting that there's, you know, sometimes the way for opening the paths is not the way that we envisioned, and how, you know, things really sometimes needs to be kind of radical. And this is what we've seen in the ADF. You know, whenever there's a legal challenge, we see this as a possibility for shifting policies around plant medicines. And so as Jero said, it's kind of breathing into what the psychedelic renaissance to really, you know, kind of giving birth to what we really envision, which is kind of the illumination part. So just, you know, I'm really confident that all the process is always for the best, and, you know, we're very much well supported by these plants as well.
Yes, beautiful. Their consciousness is helping our consciousness, and nature does know best, and we have to surrender. The name of the game is surrender, but to also show up. We're kind of coming at the very end of it, but I want to ask you guys one more question. Speaking of spaces and customs, you have both been, and the team at ICEERS has been, I don't know, you guys are superheroes to, you know, to a lot of us, and I don't know how you managed to do it, but the World Ayahuasca Conference in 2017 in Brazil, in Acre, and 2019 in Spain were I would say the best conference that I've ever attended, and I've been in this conference circuit for some time now. So how is that going? Is there potential for another one? I know it was so much work, and I appreciate you guys so much, but what's going on in that regard?
We are 2024. That's what we're shooting for, and we're still giving shape to the rest. But yeah, on the last conference, which was in 2019, I think the most sort of, one of the most interesting sort of comments came from the people doing the simultaneous translation, which, like they've been in thousands of conferences of every imaginable sort doing translation, and they came to us at the end of the conference in Girona and they said, "Who the hell are you? Like, what is this? I've never in my whole life have I seen a closing ceremony like what just happened in this auditorium. Like, who are you people? Like, what is this?" They were really, and I felt like, and they've seen everything, obviously, in terms of conferences. But yeah, 2024 around summer, that's pretty much all we know at this point.
Yeah, again, it brings me back to that moment where there were so many different Indigenous elders and representatives from, all lineages of ayahuasca. And what a gift, to have the Yawanaba, Uniqui, the Daime, the UDV, the Barquina, all there together, dancing, chanting, singing with all the scientists and policy makers and advocates. And Claudia Naranjo was there, before his passing. It was absolutely remarkable. So I'm happy to hear that 2024 might be a portal. And I'm guessing that it'll happen in Girona again.
We're still turning it in our heads.
Okay. Well, we're eyes on you guys, and if anyone wants to support ICers, again, this is a call to action. Go ahead, go and make the donations and support these incredible beings who are holding the light and the hope in our world so strong, and all the individuals actually in our community who are doing the work, showing up both for yourselves and for individuals that you're supporting. So yeah, thank you so much to both of you. Jerónimo, we're going to let you go so you can sleep. It's getting past, I'm sure, 3 a.m. Natalia, we are with you during the next phase, praying for you and the team, and Jose Campos. And thank you so much for doing the work on behalf of all of us.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, you're very welcome. Until next time.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.